Welcome to the Connection Podcast. I am Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast for me is personal. As a driven professional, I found myself an expert in all things work and business, but it was at home that I really needed clarity and ease. After finally finding it one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later, and finally discovering what really works to have connection in modern relationships, using science, simplicity and soul, our signature program, Rise into Regulation, was born. That's giving so many others in modern, driven relationships back clarity and ease for good. On the podcast today, we're going to dive deep together on all things relationships, business, identity, and leadership. And clarity and ease is at the heart of it all. And we are so happy to be with you so that you can have what you need in connection, mind, body, and soul too. There are so many places where the question, is it over, comes up. It could be something that you're thinking about and that the other person doesn't even have awareness of yet. It could be because the other person has said that they've had enough and they're moving out, that the relationship is over and it's time to move on. But maybe you're not there yet. It could be because you have been stuck in the same cycle for decades. And you've tried all of the tools in the book, you've tried the therapy, you've tried the couples therapy, you've tried screaming at each other, you've tried saying nothing at all. And it just seems like moving out or saying that the relationship is over is the only natural next choice. The biggest challenge that we face, though, is how do we figure out if this is the right decision? Is it temporary? Is it something that the other person needs to know about, that I'm wondering these questions? Or how do I even listen to the other person if they're the one raising this really heartbreaking topic and I'm just not there yet? It's the transition stage. And it's so hard to navigate because our nervous system is addicted to predictability. So when we start looking at the future and trying to wonder what on earth that would look like, when the most important piece of the puzzle often is the actions of another person. And when we realize that we don't have control over the actions of that person, and that leaves us in a position where we have to make a decision about our future that we probably didn't want to be making, whether that's what do I do next, or do I fight for this relationship, or do I leave, it still has such a huge element of uncertainty. And often the biggest challenge is the resentment that comes with the fact that we have to sit in this uncertainty at all. It's awful. Nobody signs up for a relationship expecting, okay, time's up, time to move on. Everyone, whether it's a 1 week long relationship or decades long, goes into it with hope, possibility, and the plan for a future that may be possible, probable, or expected. And so trying to figure out what to do next when uncertainty is at the table is heartbreaking, and it can create a lot of resentment. And if you've listened to my podcast on the resentment and defensive cycle, you're already going to know that resentment is one of the biggest blocks to allowing us to have the curiosity and the self-compassion that we really need to know what to do next. So today, I'm going to help you, help your body, and help all your relationships drop back into some really simple tools that are going to allow you to know what to do next without resentment. First off, I'd like to introduce you to my client. Let's call her Mary. She's been in a marriage for the last 25 years. And although she's been pouring her heart and her soul into this relationship, and they have grown kids now, it seems like their communication cycles, their debates about intimacy, their debates about trust just never seem to quite go away. And although she wants the relationship to work, it feels like that he's never quite there for her, and that they're never really going to be on the same page about the most important aspects of a relationship, whether that's emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. And he's come to her and said, I can't do this anymore. Part of her feels like it's a relief, but most of her feels broken, confused, overwhelmed, rejected, and abandoned. And although part of her can see that there is potential here if she has the right tools and the right skill set, the other part of her feels devastated, wounded, rejected, and is determined to be set free from this cycle, even if it's at the cost of the relationship. So, what does she do next? How does she figure out what's a healthy way to navigate this situation? If there is possibility, if there is hope, if there is room for those patterns to be reset, without losing herself? And does she even want to ask that question? By this point in the relationship, is it the right thing to do to just say, we tried everything? It's 25 years in. This is not going to work. The first place that we're going to be starting with Mary, in order to make sure that she can make the next decision for herself, for her own benefit, and really for the family as well, is we're going to support her with the awareness of what's actually going to help this time, not get her on another round of the merry-go-round where, even if best case scenario things are okay for a second, she's going to feel the hope crash and hangover when, after a few weeks of things being okay again, the same patterns get repeated, which is going to be even more devastating than if she chose a moment in time right now to finally accept reality that they're maybe not even compatible. Some of the biggest pieces of awareness that we can bring to the table here that set us free from getting back on that merry-go-round ever again begin, first of all, with understanding that 69% of conflict in relationships is perpetual. So, what that means is that most conflict in relationships is actually rooted in our personality or values differences. And these challenges don't go away when you just learn how to communicate better. Does that mean that a relationship is doomed because 69% of conflict in relationships is perpetual? At first, when I heard this statistic, that's what I thought. But then when I did some digging, what I realized is so often when people communicate what their challenges are, they're not communicating from the root, and they don't know how to get teamwork and support and connection, even when there are differences of opinion or personality, because that clarity doesn't exist in them yet. They spent a lifetime minimizing or repackaging or repurposing their own feelings and needs because they've never felt and experienced what it means to communicate simply and from a place that allows them to be vulnerable without losing safety. And I have another episode on this that goes into the difference between vulnerability and exposure. So bookmark that. I'll pop it in the show notes if you want to hear it later. But it's important for any relationship for us to figure out how to be vulnerable without losing our identity, without losing our sense of safety, without losing empowerment. Because so many of us have learned, either through experience or education, that vulnerability can cost us so much. We can be criticized, we can be demeaned, we can be dismissed. The thing is, there's a massive difference between being vulnerable from a place of going past our capacity versus true empowered vulnerability, which actually invites connection, invites accountability, and most importantly, repairs our relationship with self because we're no longer abandoning ourselves or dismissing or minimizing our own feelings and needs by reducing them into digestible packets. Like, all I need is the dishes done, when it's not true. What you're really needing is more support. And the way that we get clarity on how to communicate like that begins, first of all, by understanding that communication, the root of communication, is deep, secure connection to self. And then simple tools that allow you to communicate from that place without needing to be a communication expert or psychotherapist in order to communicate clearly. The second piece of awareness that I would bring to the table is an understanding that a well known 2008 psychology paper by Bargan Mosella found that unconscious reactions happen before conscious thought does. Action comes first, and then the reflection and the thoughts about it come later. By the time you're consciously thinking about how to respond or react, your body has already responded because of the programming underneath. So when you're trying to decide whether to stay or go, or whether it's self-abandonment to try again, or avoidance, we have to understand that our nervous system and those patterns and those body reactions, they're not the same as intuition. They feel the same though until we start to figure out the difference. And the way to get better at recognizing the difference is to start to understand what our nervous system addictions are. And if you have been listening to this podcast a while, you're going to know that we're going to start with the 4 Fs. Okay? Fight, which really in modern relationships just looks like hypervigilance, hyperawareness, almost a sense of control and assertiveness that can sometimes take us away from our true power and our true center of actual mastery instead of control through managing and micromanaging the outside circumstances. Second F is flight, but really that's just avoidance. Boundaries that we think are boundaries, perhaps that are just walls, an overwhelming fear of failure or fear, and just a desire to run and escape the possibility of harm because our nervous system hasn't quite learnt yet how to sit with healthy discomfort that doesn't result in abandonment or self abandonment yet. The third F is fawn, really, which is people pleasing and can result in everything from self abandonment to try and make others happy to enmeshment, which means that other people's discomfort results in our own lack of safety, right to the end of the scale, which can result in things like infidelity and the abandonment of our own truths and values in the interests of trying to keep the peace. And the last F, which can look like the most benign, but really can be the most overwhelming and paralyzing, and that's the freeze response or dissociation. Instead of knowing how to move through emotions and through difficult conversations into connection, most importantly, connection to self and self trust, paralysis is the result. We reach for dissociation, whether it's a glass of wine or scrolling at the end of the night or losing ourselves in work. Dissociation can be incredibly damaging, not only to our relationships, but to our relationships with our own selves and our health. So, getting super clear on where your body chooses one of these four F words and finding the right somatic tools to disconnect from them in a way that doesn't feel so scary and overwhelming because our body doesn't yet trust how to feel safe without using these survival tactics that used to keep us safe, but instead keep us lonely these days. And then, of course, my favorite statistic that summarizes how researchers estimate that we're only consciously aware of about 5% of what our brain is actually doing. So 95% of our decisions and relationships and behaviors, they run on autopilot. So we have to set ourselves free from being led by the nose in our lives by these patterns so that we can make the right next move. These are the first keys that I would start with to start moving away from resentment because resentment will keep us stuck. Resentment will keep us paralyzed. Resentment will keep us feeding into that story that we are at the mercy of the decisions of the people around us and at the mercy of our nervous system. And it's such a relief to realize that doesn't have to be the case. Something that I shared today with Mary to help her drop into her internal wisdom is something that dramatically changed the game for me in my own marriage and that allowed me to finally show up for myself in a way that my body had been waiting for decades. And it is a beautiful piece of wisdom that was actually shared to me by Lauren Rogers. You'll find her episode in one of the earlier episodes as well, who, when I was spiraling and feeling overwhelming resentment, not just in my marriage, but so many other areas of my life, and I felt locked and I felt lost and I felt hurt, confused, and most overwhelmingly resentful, she shared with me a story of the seasons. Imagine a good relationship and a good marriage as something that we idolize as spring and even summer. The flowers are blooming, the anticipation, the passion, the sparks, they all live in spring and blossom in the summer. In summer, that's the deep, nourishing, authentic, safe, and secure love. The thing is, every relationship has seasons, and we can idolize spring and summer, thinking that that's where we need to be all the time. But the beautiful reframe that was shared to me by Lauren Rogers when I was at a time in my life and my relationship that felt like rock bottom was the vital necessity for the season of winter. I had spent decades trying to escape winter, feeling like that's exactly where I was. I felt like the confusion, the mess, the miscommunication, the broken trust, the abandonment, the defensiveness, the anger, I felt like I had been living there for decades. And I thought that that's what winter is. But confusion and transitions live in the autumn period. This is when the seasons start changing, the wind starts to turn cold, and the leaves start to dry up. Now, what can happen in this autumn season is that when the season starts to shift and we notice the temperature go cold, we can feel this temptation to cling on to the things that aren't working for us anymore, to clutch at the people or circumstances that used to give us so much safety and joy. The thing is, if you are in a season of autumn and the season is definitely changing, for better or for worse, we don't know yet, and we try to cling on to the leaves, we try to hang on to those dead branches that the nutrients have already been withdrawn from. What happens is in winter, when the snow comes, the branches are going to be so weighed down with snow and blown away by the winds that the branches will break off and the tree will die. What we need in winter is to understand that if the leaves don't have nourishment in them anymore and they are dried up, it is time to let them go. It is time to release them, let them fall to the ground. And instead of focusing all our resources trying to clutch onto what's gone, we need to take our nutrients, drop them into our roots, and start to nourish the trunk of the tree again. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've heard me talk about this already. And if you haven't, strap on in because it only gets better. Winter is not the same as autumn. Winter is not a transition season. Winter is a nourishment season. Winter is where we learn to trust ourselves again. Winter is where we pour into our own bodies, where we start to understand our values better, where we start to disentangle our old toxic patterns from the reality of what's possible in relationships. And we start to take care of ourselves again, perhaps for the first time ever, so that when springtime comes around, our roots are so deep and the nourishment has been so effective and complete that when spring rolls around, and spring always comes around again, there is so much nourishment that new leaves come forth and new possibilities can start to take place, but only because we've recognized that winter was coming. I know Game of Thrones fans are going to love that. Winter was coming. And instead of clinging on to the old relationship patterns, the old dynamics, and just trying to make it work for the sake of making it work, or for some people, just finding someone new and hoping that that situation would provide a band aid fix for all the challenges that we've experienced in the relationship that we're having so much stress in. If we understand how important it is to respect an autumn season, and we took winter for the opportunity that it actually was, an opportunity to let the old habits and patterns and behaviors and the relationship itself be released, allow ourselves to grieve it, allow ourselves to recognize what's not healthy anymore in another person, but also in ourselves. That is the key to making sure that resentment doesn't make decisions in the next season of our life. Resentment has wisdom in it. Resentment can be a teacher, it can be a guide to helping us to understand where we have left parts of ourselves behind and that we need to go back and find them again, and perhaps embrace that season of winter where we're no longer focusing on the performance of things and the outcome itself. Instead, we're focusing on our true value and what we really need in connection, not just the performance in order to keep the label of a relationship alive. So, if you are in a season of wondering if it's over and you are trying to decide what's next, and you don't want the next decision, no matter what that is for you, to lead to another round of confusion, angst, abandonment, or regret, whether it's in this relationship or any other, the first thing I would lovingly challenge you to do is to understand that if you have found yourself at the end of autumn and winter is here, rest. Nourish yourself, however that looks. You know, if you need to go Hawaii, great. Enjoy that dissociation. And then make sure that you're finding support to come back and disentangle your nervous system addictions from your true sense of intuition, which has divine guidance to it. If you're a person of faith, get reconnected with your faith again. Trust that this season is happening for you for a higher purpose. If you're a universe person, wonderful. Trust that this season is here for you for something greater. We don't have to play God in order to get what we need in relationships. We just have to trust that this season, this winter, is for our nourishment so that we can enjoy spring again. And if you're someone like me, you can light the way for others as well and show them that spring is not only possible, it is coming. I'm so happy you're here. And if this has brought up anything and really has challenged you to think of this season in a different way, I'd love to hear from you. Come and hang out with me on Instagram. I always try to reach out to you as much as I can. And I'm always here to chat and make sure that you're never having to go through this winter season alone. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to chat to you more and hear more about what resonates for you in this episode. And I'll see you next time over on the Connection podcast. Big love.